Hey there! Chances are since you're here, you're interested in AP Zeri. I don't want to bore you, so I'll get into it as quick as I can. There'll be a couple sections in the video that I'm going over, so if you're looking for something specific, use the timestamps in the description. On to the first point. How does AP Zeri work? So you may be wondering, what exactly scales with AP on Zeri? The answer is a decent amount of stuff. Zeri's passive, both uncharged and charged passives, her W, her E on hits, and her ultimate active all have AP scalings. Realistically though, this current iteration of AP Zeri doesn't really care about her W or E's damage. W is now a physical damage spell and therefore doesn't benefit from magic penetration, and the AP scaling is quite low at 25%. The E scaling is also quite low at 20%, and the magic damage only hits the first target. So AP Zeri relies on her ultimate and charged passive to deal the bulk of her damage. So now that we've gone over how AP Zeri works, let's get into the why. Why would you ever want to build Zeri AP? And the reason honestly just comes down to preference. AP Zeri was one of the most fun builds I've ever played when it first came out, and I'm always trying to find a way to keep the build alive. Logistically, the build is not terrible. You can do a good amount of AoE in team fights, you have great single target burst, and due to your E, you are very mobile and deadly in jungle skirmishes. However, I will preface this by saying, crit or AD Zeri is almost always better for your team. AP Zeri is a very selfish playstyle, very fun, but not that great at closing out games. With that out of the way, let's get into the main section. What do you build? The first thing you have to understand about Zeri's passive is it scales with attack speed, meaning if you have no attack speed, your auto will take longer. Also, Zeri's passive will charge quicker if you have more attack speed and more move speed. With this in mind, let me introduce you to the hybrid build. You start off the build with Rageblade and Gnasher's Tooth, and finish off with high AP items like Deathcap and Shadowflame. With Rageblade and Alacrity stacked, you'll have 1.49 attack speed at level 6 and 1.66 attack speed when ulted. This is a 0.01 attack speed away from Zeri's cap. The idea behind this build is it allows for AP Zeri to function in longer fights where sustained DPS is favored. You still have a very strong right-click ability that you get to use more often, but the negatives of this build is the lack of Q damage. On-hit style champions generally have high attack speed and or built-in on-hit abilities. Zeri's capped attack speed means she can't apply on-hits as often. You're basically trading your Q damage for your charged attack damage. Full disclosure, I haven't fully tested this build out, it's mostly something that I've theory tested. The next build path is the full burst build. With this build, you completely skip over any attack speed to juice up your AP. First items can be Ludens, Malignance, or Deathcap. Zeri doesn't need mana in this build, but the passes of Ludens and Malignance are quite good. If you're against weaker opponents, things that can't punish you, rushing Deathcap and Shadowflame is a good way to accelerate yourself. Once you finish off Ludens, Deathcap, and Shadowflame, you want to start building situationally. Things like Zhonya's, Banshees, and Protobelt are very good. If you don't need the defensive items or you're behind, spec into high damage items such as Void Staff / Crypt Bloom and Storm Surge. I want to briefly touch on a couple items that you may think you want to build, but actually aren't that good. Rylai's, Liandry's, Blackfire Torch, Cosmic Drive, Static Shiv, Lichbane, and Horizon Focus. You can proc Rylai's, Liandry's, Blackfire Torch, and Cosmic Drive with either your charged or uncharged auto attack, but this does not make them viable. If you auto attack without a charge, you're constantly depleting the charge just to keep the item's passives up and losing significant damage. Your Q does not proc any of these items at all. As for Lichbane, it's a very similar situation. You can get a Spellblade proc from either charged or uncharged autos, but you'll hardly ever get to use more than 1 or 2 Lichbane procs in a fight. It's probably the best out of all unoptimal items, but it's not good enough to give up a slot. Horizon Focus is bad because you can't proc it on your R, only your W and Chain Lightning can actually proc it. It's just not worth an item slot. And lastly, we have Static Shiv. Shiv lost its AP scalings and its energized effect. It's still a decent wave clear item, but it has no synergy with AP Zeri. Rest in piss, Static Shiv. Now that you have an idea of what to build, let's go over runes. The best rune you can take is Fleet Footwork. The next best option is either First Strike or Dark Harvest. Neither of these are going to contribute directly to your damage, but gives you a bit of options for scaling, with First Strike being the more economy based one and Domination being more of the combat based one. The third best option you can take is Electrocute. Other than these 4 runes, nothing is really worth it. Fleet Footwork will give you access to the best rune tree in my opinion. Absorb Life gives you a modicum of sustain throughout the game, something you'll sorely miss in side lanes. If you absolutely refuse to take it, always go Triumph, as Presence of Mind is just not needed at all. 99% of the time you want to take Alacrity. It reduces your Q cooldown and your attack animation and just generally helps with making Zeri smoother. If you absolutely have to have it, you can go Bloodline, but it is incredibly weak with AP Zeri because your attacks are so weak. Haste is not a terrible rune, but because you are relying on your ult and attacks mostly, it's just not optimal. Always take Cut Down. There is no reason to not go Cut Down with basic basically any build. Zeri's charged auto attack has an execute. The closer you get people to low HP, the better. Coup de grace and last stand are just anti-synergistic and just not good enough. Cut down is so overpowered. Never not go cut down. Now for your secondary tree, you have a couple options. I personally like domination because you can grab ultimate hunter and eyeball collection. Also sudden impact is quite good. Sorcery is also viable since you can grab absolute focus and gathering storm, and if you absolutely need it, nullifying orb, but if you're getting to the point where you're relying on nullifying orb, you probably need to work on your laning phase. The only other tree you should consider is inspiration, cashback or free boots, then triple tonic, cosmic insight, or jack of all trades. For your sub rune, go double adaptive and scaling health. Now that we know how to build, let's get into some mechanics, starting with the flash mechanics. You can Q flash to extend the range of your Q, but be careful. If you flash too slow, you'll end up hitting less bullets of your Q, decreasing your damage. You cannot W flash to extend the range. As you can see when I flash, the range will not extend and the cast point will not change. You can flash W, but it's just too slow to really ever be useful. You can cancel your E at any point with flash. This is really nice because it lets you engage over walls from some serious distance really quickly, but also it's really good if you accidentally mess up your E. Finally, you can also R flash. One really interesting thing that I noticed a while ago is Zeri's R animation doesn't line up with the damage. This makes your R flash pretty unreactable since they have to react to it quite early in the animation. Now let's get into some input buffering, double casting, animation canceling shenanigans. You can buffer your passive auto after any ability, just know your charged passive Q is a little bit slower because of the animation. You can cast your Q immediately after your passive, but if you do it too fast, you'll cancel your passive. Generally, this isn't like a huge animation cancel, you're just slightly removing that little bit of recovery animation like you would do when orb walking. One last thing I forgot to note, you can double cast your Q and your R, and you can input buffer your right click with your R. You can cast your Q during your W so they fire at the same time. This can be useful to hit multiple targets in different directions or to overlap onto one single target. You cannot auto attack or Q while you're Eing, but your E does reset your autos and your Q. You can also input buffer your auto attack, but not your Q when you E. You can cast your R during your E. If you combine this with your E flash cancel / R flash cancel, you can ult from a long distance very quickly. This is what makes AP Zeri so dangerous. You can also buffer your charged and uncharged autos as well as your Q during your R, but be wary. If you're wall riding during your ult, you cannot buffer your Q, but you can still buffer your auto attack. If you cancel your wall ride with flash, you can still buffer your Q during your R. You can animation cancel the ending of your R and W with each other, but they won't double cast. You can see with your W you have this little bit of a pull up animation, and with your R you have a little bit of a upward jump animation, and when you do either one of them over each other, these animations are cancelled. And that's about it. All the mechanics I've talked about can be applied to Zeri no matter how you build her, whether you choose AP, tank, or crit. If I missed something, be sure to let me know down in the comments, and if you're interested in more AP Zeri stuff, I'll link my playlist of Zeri videos down below.
That won't ever change. Yeah, sometimes I'm mad, sometimes I'm okay. Yeah, I know I'll have what I want someday. I need my space now so I can feel nothing.